and welcome to today's interview on the Victorious Souls podcast with me, Danielle Burnock from danielleburnock.com. Love yourself from Survive to Thrive, that lady on the internet who loves you, with a gentleman who did not allow ACEs in his childhood. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and he'll explain that to you more. He didn't allow ACEs, the prevalence of them, 8 out of 10, the prevalence of them to prohibit him from having a good future. He didn't allow that. And he didn't allow it to hinder the future of his son either. In fact, he has done some pretty phenomenal things. His name is Nathaniel A. Turner. He is a thought leader. He is a renowned speaker. He is a humanitarian. He is a leading parental empowerment activist and an author of multiple books. So I'm going to bring him in here to meet you and to share his story of how he has overcome these things and just accomplished so much with his life, his own life, and the life of his son. Welcome with me today, Nathaniel A. Turner. Thank you, Nathaniel, for being with me today and sharing your story with my audience.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I was telling them about you and how you didn't allow your past to prohibit your future, and about ACEs, and that you would explain these to them. Will you give us some context? Tell us about your childhood and your background. Where are the things that you came from? What are all those things that you had to overcome?
Sure. I'm a native of Gary, Indiana. I'm the son of Gladys and Tommy Turner. And if you know anything about Gary, Gary is certainly I was born in 1965. So Gary was very much a blue collar town, lots of steel mills, lots of factories. So most of the people in Gary were blue collar workers. My father was one of those people. My mother was an administrative assistant. So that's kind of what my parents did for a living, and that sort of formed who I was. My parents had this ideal that I should do better than them, not always having a prescription for how to make that a reality, but they thought, as most parents believe today, that their children should do better than them, but not necessarily giving us all the tools and strategies to make that a reality. Gary, in the 60s, 70s, Gary was the first city in America to have an African American mayor. I'm sorry. So that tells you a little bit about Gary. Gary at one point was considered the most segregated city in America, as well as the murder capital of the world. So
wow, I knew Chicago went by that for a while, but Gary?
Yeah, proportionally based on per capita, Gary had more murders at the time than did any other city in the world for a while. So
wow.
Yeah. Not one of his proudest moments, but there are a lot of great things about Gary. But that's where I'm from.
Okay.
And you mentioned ACEs, so yeah, I'm a product of a household that I learned. I didn't know I was living through ACEs as a child, because no one tells you that there was a right.
Children don't know that. That's just their normal.
But when I did see the data, I learned that I grown up in a household with 8 of the 10 ACEs. And ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. If anyone's unfamiliar with that, it's a study done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente many years ago, and they determined there are certain things that would keep children from not only achieving in the immediate, but could have long-term health, mental health, employment, etc., socioeconomic outcomes because of those ACEs. And usually they say if you have more than 3, you're kind of doomed. The scale said I have 8, so there's that.
Wow. Yeah, I'm familiar with ACEs, and even side effects from it later in life present in the area of physical health as well, in the area of cardiology and diabetes and things like that. It makes them ill. This is a side effect of trauma that is undealt with, which we have learned, and I'm sure you have learned. If you do deal with it, you can mitigate those.
Yes. I guess we should say, I'm sorry, you go.
You can mitigate those. They don't have to bring forth what they want to bring forth, but they will if you don't do anything about it.
Absolutely. I guess I failed to say what some of them are, but that you could live in a home where someone has been incarcerated. You could live in a home where someone abuses alcohol or drugs. You could live in a home where someone is abused physically. You could live in a home where someone is abused mentally. You could live in poverty. So I think those are five but there are 10.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. And I'm thankful for you being able to get out of there. How did you deal with that when you were growing up? Did you feel the suffering of it growing up, or did it kind of just blow by you as normal?
Yeah, it's interesting that when you're a child and you're living in something, you don't necessarily know that anybody else recognizes that your life is different. So if, for example, the sheriff shows up at your home and puts a note on your home to tell your family that they may lose their home because they haven't paid their taxes, your friends don't know that. Your friends
Yeah.
don't have any idea of that. Or if you live in a home and your mom is abused by your father, your friends, they don't know that. You go to school, you get up and you go to school because that's what you have to go do. So no, usually only the people who maybe are closest to you know how difficult it is. But by and large, most of us, even now as adults, we don't share with everybody what's going on. We try to keep things and think we can handle them all on our own. And children, I think, are certainly no different than that.
Oh, yeah. And there's all the shame that goes with it as well. If you speak up, then you feel shame in and of yourself,
Yep.
and then you're afraid you're going to be shamed by them. So shame is a big silencer
Yeah.
of people and paralyzes us from getting the help that we need a lot of times.
You could also think you're going to make it worse if you open your mouth and say anything.
True. Yes,
So
I've
yeah,
heard that
yeah.
too. I know someone recently who had a situation at home that was physical and talked with someone about it, and they wanted to report it and they were like, no.
Right.
It's like, it's that fear. Fear is another aspect of it. It's like it's a complicated mess. It's a complicated mess, but really the way out is through support in
Mm-hmm.
some way. So the more of us that find a way to bring support, to surround people, to educate them, the more help that can be available. Like trauma informedness in schools, people are trying to bring trauma informedness into schools so they can recognize children that are having trauma responses and be
Mm-hmm.
able to mitigate things instead of, just, oh, they have a learning disability or they have that and they just shove it under the rug because maybe they're brilliant and it has something to do with their life
Their home life.
situation.
Yeah, their home life. Exactly. Yeah.
So this is really important. I'm going to pause here for my listeners to, pay attention to the people around you and see where you can help others, because people do, they have a tendency to hide. What are you hiding from someone? And see if you can reach out for help. Someone close to you. We need one another. People need people, and we can help one another if we will dare to trust someone. But sometimes the people we reach for trust, they don't help us. Like you had a guidance counselor. I don't want to neglect mentioning this guidance
Sure.
counselor. We don't
Sure.
need to bring up this person's name because it's not about shaming a person. But when I heard that, that just grieved my heart. Tell us what this guidance counselor did.
Yeah, it was the end of my sophomore year in high school, and you meet your counselor to start to decide what you're going to take your junior year, and then that's the time when high school counselors start to ask you, what are you thinking about doing in the future? And all of my closer friends were preparing to go to college. And so I said, I'm going to go to college. And he said, you're not college material. The best you could hope to do would be to work in a factory, but more likely join the military.
Wow. Why
And
did
that
he
was,
say that? Why did he come to that conclusion?
well, I mean, without asking him, it'd be unfair to
Oh,
speculate.
true,
Right?
true.
But I would say, I would say he didn't think that there was very much else that I could do. I also think that as a father, one of the things I find to be interesting is that my parents did not participate in my life like that. So they didn't show up they wouldn't have known what to show up and say to a guidance counselor.
Mm,
They didn't go to college. In fact, my grandparents, I believe, I don't think any of them finished high school, and I
mm,
don't know that all of them attended high school. So there was not a history of high achieving education in my household. So if your parents say we want you to go to college, they're basically telling you what they are watching other people's kids do, and they would like you to do the same thing. But those other people may know how to get their kids to college. My parents didn't know how to do that. So now I have this guidance counselor, and I'm just essentially regurgitating what my parents have told me I should do. And the guidance counselor says, well, I'm looking at your grades, and you're not college material. So.
Wow, were your friends who were going to college, were they like high grades and were their parents highly involved?
So education is interesting. I moved, long story short, I moved from one side of town as a fifth grader. And before I moved, I was in quote unquote gifted and talented classes.
Oh, wow.
Then I moved to this part of the city that was integrated. And suddenly I was in more or less remedial classes. So there's this thing called tracking. And so because as a sixth grader, I was now in these lesser classes, I couldn't get out of those lesser classes to get into the better classes. So some of my good friends were in AP courses, the advanced placement courses, and I was just in the basic classes. So I'm assuming that if I give the guidance counselor the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to assume that if he looked and said, well, there are kids who are in advanced placement, these are college level classes, and then there's this guy in just these regular classes, and he's only earning C's. Well, he's not college material. These other kids are. He's not. But what he failed to understand was that part of my problem was as not having, one, being sort of bored, but two, not having people believe that I could do better. So oftentimes you perform to the standard that people have an expectation of you. So I just did enough to get by. And until he told me that that was the best I could hope to do.
Wow, but you were in gifted classes and then you changed schools.
I changed schools.
Did they test you that, or did they have different?
No,
they just
I don't
stuck you
remember.
in there? Did they just judge you and stick you there?
I think that I just was judged and stuck in
I want to
those classes.
apologize for whoever did that to you. I'm so sorry. That was
It's
just
okay.
wrong.
It worked. I guess it worked out okay.
I know, but because you fought, we'll get to there. But you're reminding me of another young man that I had on my podcast, Colin Jewett. He's really all about the education system as well. And he was in school, and he didn't have to study. He was acing everything, but when he got to college, suddenly it wasn't working anymore.
Right.
And so it was the same thing. He was bored. It's like there's a way to learn, and it's not just standard like that. And when people, it's not uncommon for gifted people to not do well because they're bored. It's like you're being under challenged, you need more. So it's like, I'm just, wow. So pause here. If you have kids in school and maybe they're not doing so good, don't jump to the conclusion that they're dumb. Investigate the situation. Maybe they're bored. Maybe it's the wrong style of learning. What do they need? Look for how to help them instead of how to shame and judge them. Want to lift them up.
Agreed.
So you, at one point, you made a decision, because I asked you, how did you get out of this being pigeonholed into this way, and you have all this negative stuff holding you down, but you decided that you weren't going to be a passive victim. How did you make that decision? Was that a one-day thing, or was it an accumulative thing? How did you do this deciding?
Yeah, I think we are an amalgamation of our experiences, and so when you asked me that question earlier, it made me think a great deal about my own childhood, and I think in many ways, while my childhood had lots of challenges, the flip side of that is that I had a lot of things that were beneficial. So sometimes the challenges became things that helped me to be better down the road. My father told me at the same time that this guidance counselor tells me the best I could hope to do is join the military. My father says you have 2 choices to make in 3 years. And I was like, well, what are those 2 choices? He's like, you have 1 choice to make in 3 years. And I said, what are those? Well, he said, you can join the military. Now, the counselor told me that's my best hope. My father says you can join the military, but you know how I feel about being in the military. And these are his words: a black man has no business being in the military. I was in the military. He's in the military in the 60s. So you don't have any business being in the military. So that's out. Okay. So counselor tells me I can go join the military. My dad tells me no.
Okay.
So now I'm down to 2 choices. All right. So he says you can get a job and move out. I'm like, well, that's an overrated experience. I've been working since I was 10. So moving out and getting a job and taking care of myself immediately out of high school, that's not very exciting to me. So the
No.
third option was you can go to college. I'm like, okay, that's the best of the three options. I don't know how I'm gonna get there, but that's the only option that I see available to me. So what I was able to do is the friends that I knew who were taking advanced placement classes,
Mhm.
I started watching what they were taking. Okay, well, how do I get in some of these classes that they're taking? And I had the good fortune that some of their parents were generous enough to allow me to ask them questions about how they became who they were. And it was in those conversations with those other parents who decided, as I mentioned, loving me for no reason whatsoever, that I figured out how to change my life.
Oh,
At least
wow.
how to get to college. I figured how to get to a college. My goal was to get to Fisk University. That was the only school that I had in mind. I'm going to get to Fisk University, and then that's going to be the first step to being a lawyer. That I'd agreed with my friend Willie that I would be a lawyer. He was going to be the doctor, and I was going to be the lawyer. That was the plan. He was in special ed classes, and I was in these other remedial kind of courses. And he and I made this pact. He was going to be the doctor, and I was going to be the lawyer. That's kind of the funniest thing in the world because we graduated at the end of our class, and that's not because his last name ends with U and mine ends with T. I think I was 227 in the class at 242. He was somewhere, and we were at the bottom ranking of our class.
Wow. Did he become a doctor?
He did.
What
He
kind of
did. He's a
doctor is he?
urologist. A
Oh,
urologist, one of the top urologists in the country.
well,
Yes,
let's give a
absolutely.
hand for him. Willie, you said, right?
Yes,
Yay for
yes.
Willie.
Dr. Willie Underwood the third. Yes, yes,
That
he did
is
become a doctor.
amazing. That's a second thing to champion here. Not only did you decide for yourself, but you found support. You found a
I
friend,
found
and the
support.
two of you made this pact. And then you had friends
Yes.
whose parents, it sounds like they mentored you in some way.
Yeah.
You looked to them and you looked for the mentorship. So you looked for the support that you needed. And by the grace of God, you found it. These people,
I,
as you said, they loved you. They
yeah.
loved you. They
No,
gave you what you needed to empower you to do that.
I
That's
had a,
amazing.
I had a friend named James Kimbrough. His father was his late father, the late Judge James Kimbrough, was a judge. So he was the most respected person that I knew. And when I'd had a chance to talk to him, I asked, "Where'd you go to college?" He said Fisk, and thus Fisk became the school that I had to. Because Judge Kimbrough was the most respected person I knew. So I'm like, if Fisk is okay for Judge Kimbrough, then Fisk has to be okay for me. And that was the one school that I was hell bent on finding a way to get admitted to, and I did get admitted to Fisk. And regrettably, Fisk lost his accreditation for his accounting program, which is what I was going to major in, and so
Ah,
I ended up not going to Fisk. But that was the one school that, and so he was also, because he was a judge, he was also a lawyer. So I had the law school picked out too that I was going to attend because I was just going to do, if it worked for Judge Kimbrough, then it could work for me.
yeah, that's awesome. And again, pause here to you listening. Look at what Nathaniel here did. He looked at who around him has what he wants. And then he sought for a way to get an audience with that person and to mirror after them. So if you're looking for something, look around you. Who do you have around you that you can look to? Even if you can't get an audience, you can still watch. There's a way to study and to learn and to go after what you want. So what school did you end up going to, Nathaniel?
I ended up attending Butler University, and I attended Butler University because my mother insisted that, because my uncle lived in Indianapolis, is where Butler is, that I could at least get a ride home on weekends. So there was two schools that said yes to me, Butler and Fisk. Everybody else said no. Those two schools said yes, and so I ended up at Butler because my uncle lived in Indianapolis, and my mother thought on weekends if I needed to get away home, I could have a ride home from my uncle, or at least I could hang out at my uncle's home
Oh,
if I
that's
felt
cool.
lonely. Yeah,
So that's where you graduated from, was
that's
there?
why I
You
went to
get your law
undergrad.
degree from there?
I got my law degree from Valparaiso University, so that was obviously a few years later. But my undergrad in accounting is from Butler.
Oh, wonderful. That's so cool about your mom.
Yes,
Did you go home and visit or hang out with your uncle?
I, I did, but not as much as she probably thought I was going to.
Oh, that's awesome. So then you, after you did this, you got married after you graduated from school and stuff.
Hmm.
Then you became a dad. And like part of your story that I shared with them is how you did this phenomenal. turnaround in your own life, but you didn't stop there. You also did this in the life of your son. You looked at your upbringing and what you needed, wanted, lacked, and all of that, and then you became a dad. But how did you feel when you first found out you were going to become a dad? What went through your mind and your emotions at the very beginning of that before you formulated everything?
Sure. So I was in my third and final year of law school, and I got married, and my wife. Now I should say that I was in a 5-year program because I was doing a master's degree. So I was at the end of my third year. My wife and I got married. The following summer, she said, "I'm ready to have a child," and she would say her biological clock was ticking, and I'd say, "Your biological clock is digital. You cannot hear it." So I didn't want to be a parent. I didn't want to be a father. I didn't want to be a father primarily because of my own childhood, and I really had great reservation and fear that I would mess it up. That I had this tumultuous relationship with my dad. I did not want to bring another child into the world and bring the things that my father brought into my relationship with a child. But I had the good fortune of watching an animated movie, and that animated movie changed my whole perspective about being a father. That was The Lion King.
Wow.
And there's a scene in The Lion King where Simba, I'm gonna try to tell you the story without crying, where Simba goes to the elephant cemetery, and Mufasa goes and saves him and comes back, and he lectures him about not listening to what he says, and then Simba says to him, "Oh my goodness!" Simba says to him, "Dad, but we're pals, right?" And I thought in that moment, that's exactly what I want with the relationship with my son. I want my son to say, or child to say to me, that we're pals. And in this moment, I realized there's a way for me to be a parent. And so I agreed, okay, well, maybe your biological clock is ticking. And so
I will listen to
I will
it.
listen.
I will hear the ticking.
I will abide by it. And yeah, within a month or so later, she was pregnant.
Wow. That's really amazing. The Lion King is a pivotal movie for me, but for in different ways of
Yep.
with
No.
father issues. It's a really good movie. So many lessons that can be got out of that movie.
Yeah, well,
So
it
many.
is. It's the reason he's here. So yes, I'm like, okay, well, cool. There's a way for me to be better than my dad was. And in fact, from The Lion King, there are lots of characters in The Lion King that then became part of how we understood putting together a village for this child we were going to have.
Wow. So now let's move into the next thing that you did. I want to talk on the backward design, you call it, but you just talked about a village, so I don't want to move too quickly from that.
Sure.
So before you go into the backward design of what you did with your son, that's what you called it. That's why people listening, why are you calling it that? Because that's what he calls
That's
it,
what I call
the
it.
backward design.
Yes.
It's the name of something that he's created. But before you get into that, talk a little bit about that village and how you did that and what led into this backward design.
So again, I'm going to reference The Lion King, a very
Go
opening
ahead.
scene
Oh,
of The
yeah.
Lion King, right? You see, you see Rafiki holding Simba up over this village. And the village is fully recognizing that this young life is going to one day be responsible for everybody in the village. And that's where I started to think about children. One day, our children are going to be responsible for all of us. And in order for us to get what we need when they become adults, we have to give them something worthwhile while they're children. So I'm like, okay, well, that means we have to construct a village of people who can pour enough into his or her life so that when he or she are old enough, they can give back in multitudes what they receive. And so we went about, if I'd have known you at the time we learned that LaTanya was pregnant, we would have sent you a letter. You'd have gotten a letter from us, and it would have said, hey, we're expecting a child. We don't know what we're having. We value you greatly. We want you to be a part of the village. Here are 10 names, male and female, that we're thinking about. We're not going to name the baby for 8 days. We're going to follow this ancient tradition. And on the 8th day, based upon the culmination of what everybody thinks that they see out of this child, that's the name we're going to pick.
Wow.
We want you to be a part of it. So on the 8th day, we named him. And we, and some of the people of the village were there, and We had this whole naming ceremony, etc. At 12:01 at midnight, rather I should say, on the eighth day, he received his name.
Wow. And his name is?
His full name is Naim Kahari Turner Bandeli. Naim is Arabic and it means benevolent. Kahari is Swahili, it means kingly. Turner is a name that originates from slavery. It is that, and we gave him a last name that would connect him to the continent of Africa, which is Bandeli, which is Yoruba, which means born away from home. And so his full name means he is a benevolent king, despite being born from slavery and born away from home.
Wow, that's so powerful. That's
Yeah.
so powerful. And having a naming ceremony. I don't know if you've ever watched Star Trek Next Generation, but
I
they
have
had
not.
one of those in one of my favorite episodes of that called The Inner Light. And they
Okay.
were off on some other planet and they did a naming ceremony and they gathered the whole village around to do that. So I had this visual when you were talking about the
Yep.
naming ceremony.
That's
So,
that's pretty much it. It's an interesting thing to take a child home from the hospital with no name, because they
yeah.
said, "Well, what's the baby's name?" Not have a name yet. So on this original birth certificate, it says Baby Boy Turner.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. That's so profound.
Yep.
That's cool. Wow. So let's go into the backward design then. From
Sure.
the naming ceremony, how did you go from this village? How did the village play into the backward design as well?
Yeah, I mean, our village plays into everything that we do, because we believe that we're all products of our environment. So like a tree, and the child is the fruit. I'm the tree. My wife Latanya is the tree. The fruit is Naeem. But a part of the tree is the ecosystem, right? So the tree stands and there's dirt, and the tree stands, but then the tree needs water, and the tree stands and there's air to breathe. So those are all the parts of the things that also comprise the village. But in Naeem's case, because at the time I was a law student and was graduating and realized I had no idea what it was that I was going to do, and I had nobody knocking the door down to hire me. I was
Mhm.
like, man, this is a terrible situation to be in. I've done everything I was supposed to do, allegedly, and now I'm at the end of this part of my journey, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got this family, and I don't know how to take care of them. And in part of my mind, I'm like, I'm going to be just like my father. I'm going
Oh,
to be just
wow.
like my dad. I don't have a plan. I don't have a job, right? How am I going to take care of this family? And so I thought, if the world were perfect, what is it? Where would I be graduating from right now? And I'm like, well, I would be graduating from Harvard Law. And because if I was graduating from Harvard Law, everyone would want to hire me, right? It wouldn't matter what kind of grades I had. I just would tell people I'm a graduate of Harvard Law. In fact, people would introduce me first and say Harvard Law graduate Nate Turner. And so we wrote Harvard and got an application from Harvard with the ideal that we won't let this happen to our child. We won't put our child in a position of, hey, you got to go to college, without having a real ideal about what that actually means. So we wrote Harvard to get an application from Harvard to find a way to get an unborn child to meet the academic qualifications of Harvard. And in that application, not only did we find the academic portion, we found two other things that perhaps are more important than the academic pieces, which is that Harvard at the time, this is 1994, we wrote, you tear off the little postcard
Mhm.
you go to the library and just send the application in, they mail it back to you. It said, great school, we're a great student, world citizen, and students who care for something greater than themselves. Those are the three things they were looking for. So we're like, okay, we got to raise someone who's, now we call it intellectually ambitious. We have to raise someone who is globally and culturally competent, and we have to raise someone who's driven by humanity. And that's became the template that we used for everything he's ever done in his life.
Wow. And you teach other parents how to do this, don't you? You call
Absolutely.
that a life template,
The life
right?
template. Yep. We ask
Yeah.
parents, what are your most audacious hopes and dreams for your children? Because we need a destination. You mentioned Star Trek. Even Star Trek, right? They have to know where they're going.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just floating around in space. But that's the way many of us live our life. That's what I was doing when I was getting ready to graduate from law school. I'm just floating around in space. I have no idea what I'm doing next. It's a terrible thing to do, to just be floating around in space. And so we now ask parents, what are your most audacious hopes and dreams for your children? And then once you can tell us where that destination is, then we can start backward designing a way to get there.
How young or old do the children have to be for this backward design to work?
I've had parents with before their children are born, so expecting parents. I've had a child as old as 35 ask me how to do it for them.
Really?
She's now a doctor. When I met her, she was a teacher, and today she's a doctor. She has her doctorate in, I think, educational leadership. So she received that last year. So we did the very same thing. Where do you want to go with your life? And then let's talk about what steps we need to take to make that a reality.
Wow, that's really cool. Adults could still do this, so you don't have to give up hope if you're one of those people floating
Right.
around out there not knowing what to do because they didn't have the village, they didn't have the backward design, they didn't have the help they needed, and they found themselves somewhere and want to go somewhere else.
Correct.
So you offer hope for that even for adults.
Yeah, and I'm the test case dummy. So I'm like I'm doing it like I'm not. It's the guy with the hair club for me that says I'm not just the owner. I'm a client. Yes, I'm the test case dummy. I'm doing it for me too.
Oh, wow, that's exciting. That's really exciting because that really enlarges it and it gives a lot of hope to adults that are floundering. So,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. You talk about a who mindset. Can you elaborate on that also? Is that part of your backward design,
Yeah.
or does that go
Absolutely.
along with it, or?
Yeah, I would say it's part and parcel with it. I think so. When I think of who, I think about the end of one's life. It sounds a little bit morbid, maybe. Some years ago, Danielle lost a friend. I believe his passing was due to suicide. I don't I can't say for certain because
Mhm.
that's his family's decision to tell. But there are enough indicators that I've had and the conversation I had that that's my understanding. That person was extremely close to me. He and I shared the same birthday. We belonged to the same fraternity. He was a part of my family for more than 20 years. And one day he was gone. That was a tough thing for me because I felt like I let him down. I felt like there was more that I should have done. I wasn't sure that he knew how much he meant to me. And so I kind of made this promise that that's not what I would do. In his passing, when I was at his funeral, there was a sign that said, oh, I guess on his tomb it said, artist and poet. And I saw that and I said, well, who knew that? Like, who knew that that's who he was? And at that moment, I said, you know what? We're all living our who every day. We're all living that last. We live in our obituary. We live in our eulogy. We're living those last words on our tomb or urn or whatever. And I've got to start thinking about who I want to be at the end.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not who I want to be at the end, somebody else is going to tell a story about me that I might have been completely, it may not have been on board with. And so that's the who mindset. Who do you want to be when you are no more? If you were to
Wow.
write your Wikipedia page backwards, your Wikipedia page would say what? And so that's what I challenge folks to do today. If today's your last day and the creator, whatever you believe in, whispers in your ear and says, your time is up, unless you can tell me now what you're going to do different tomorrow that makes me worthwhile giving you another day, what would you say? What would you say you're going to do? And so that's the approach that we take about around the who mindset.
Wow, that's really profound. I've read the book Seven Habits of Highly Successful People. He talks about begin with the end in mind, but I think you elaborate on it more. Like he has it tells you to write your obituary. I actually sat down and did a life mission after that,
Mm-hmm.
which was quite helpful. But your take on it, I think, goes like if today was the last day, why should I give you another day?
Yeah, should I give you another day?
It does feel kind of morbid, but it really does put you into a different mindset. I just had shared an article on my website that gave, was given permission from a gentleman named Daniel C.
Okay.
about people making decisions and choices at any age. And they were asking them, if you could spend time with, I forgot what the three choices were, but anyone that you admire who wrote a book or a family member or some other, they were given three choices. And they asked these young people, and then they asked people who were older. And the young people were more far reaching with their choice. And the older people, they were like family and stuff like that. But then they switched it up and gave them both, put them in a time crunch limit. The young
Okay.
people. Well, if you were leaving in 2 weeks for this, or if they made it so they had less time.
Right.
And when they changed the time criteria, it changed how they processed the question, which that's what you made me think of with this Wikipedia thing. Why should I give you one more day?
Yeah.
That's really, it's profound. Thank you for sharing that. I
Oh,
want to
no.
take some time myself and sit down and meditate on that myself, because I think that's very useful.
Yeah, yeah. I've asked my son to evaluate me from the standpoint that I'm no more. And
Oh,
I
wow.
remember sharing that with some other men, and they said to me, "Why would you do that? Like, that's ridiculous." I said, "Well, because he's more likely to write my obituary. And if I'm not who I think I am now, it's going to play out in my obituary, and that's what's going to follow me around into eternity. And maybe it doesn't matter who you are into eternity, but it does matter to me. Moreover, what matters to me is this ideal that we are never who we think we are. We are not even who we believe others think we are. We are solely who those we're in relationship understand us to be.
Wow.
So I could say, Danielle says, "Hey, what kind of dad are you?" And I'm like, "I'm the best father in the world." And you could say, "What kind of dad does your son think you are?" And I could say, "Oh, he thinks I'm the greatest father in the world." And then you might have a conversation with him. You might say, "He is an absolute jerk." Then I'd say to you, "Who am I?" Because if I pass tomorrow, who's writing my obituary? Who's leaving the last word about me? The person who thought I was a jerk.
Wow.
So I'm in a relationship with him. So what I have to do is do all I can with the time I have present to
Right.
not be a jerk to him
Right.
or
It's
to
all about
anyone I come in
relationship.
contact with.
Yeah.
Yep,
About relationship. You keep the talking open, the communication. You can work your way through anything, because we can all be jerks, right?
absolutely,
Every human can be a jerk, but every human can forgive. And it's just what do we choose to do with
absolutely.
that? So that's, wow. You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm just very thankful for that. It doesn't happen all the time when I'm
well,
interviewing people, so I'm really loving that, to
well,
take that and do some of those things myself.
I'm
Well, you
glad I could
have
be.
you have books. You've written many books. Why don't you hold up your books and tell us about your books, and how did you get started writing book? What book came first,
All right.
and why? Why did you
So
write it?
so the first book I wrote was this book. This is Raising Superman, and this is essentially just a collection of letters that I wrote Naeem. So I started writing this young man at 2 because he insisted that he get mail. And what started out as just postcards and greeting cards became letters. And it became letters that were for him, but as much as they were for him, they were for me. They were cathartic for me to finally be able to express the things that I wish my father had said to me, that gave me some insight on the kinds of things I would wish my father had shared with me about life and the future. And I thought, if I don't make it beyond today, what do I want my son to know if he's 2? What do I want him to know when he's 32? What do I want him to know when he's 52? And so each letter was written with the idea that it was not written for him at his current age. It was written for him as an adult later on who might be searching for answers for some of life's biggest problems. So
Wow.
that's what that is. And unbeknownst to me, I gave him the letters in a binder. At a 16-year-old, he decided that he'd had enough of high school. He had done everything he was supposed to do. He packed his bags and moved to Brazil to chase his dream of playing professional soccer. I
Wow.
put the letters in a binder because he was going to be 7,000 miles away. Because I had prepared right to give my son for him to have insight on being a man without me. I just didn't expect it to happen at 16.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
put the letters in a binder. I give them to him. I stay in Rio for a few days because every person should stay in Rio by themselves for a few days. And I get a call from my wife, and she says he's not doing well. He's at the academy. You're gonna have to go back. I go back to the academy. Long story short, I get there. He's not ready to leave. He says, "Dad, I just have one question." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I reread the letters. Did you put them in any particular order?" I said, "No." He said, "I read the first 3. I'm going to be fine. But not only am I going to be fine, whenever I come home, we're going to take these letters and we're going to publish them." and we're going to share them with other people, Dad, because not only when you tell me something do I believe it, I know it's supposed to happen. So 18 months or so later, when he came home, unfortunately with a concussion, he did all the work to get the book published, and that became the first thing that I wrote and set the stage for me to write other things.
Wow. So it wasn't even, I'm going to be an author kind of thing. It just kind of evolved because of you just pouring into your son. That's
Right,
beautiful.
right. So remember the said, here's the village, and recognizing that one day if we do enough good stuff, this child is going to give us something back. That child gave me something back much sooner than I would have ever expected.
Wow. What book came after that one?
So then I wrote this little book here called "Stop the Bus" because I was so frustrated with education and the way that we facilitate it in this country, that I wanted people to have something really quick to read. So what I started to do actually was writing newspapers whenever I read the letter to the editor. I'd write a letter to an editor or write something to a news station about something that they did about education. Essentially tell them you're wrong, you're wrong, this is what you should be saying or doing. And so my wife and son said, dude, you're just going to frustrate yourself. But these are good, so why don't you put them in a short essay? And because when you write a letter to the editor, it can't be more than 300 words. Each one of these 31 essays are just 300 words. So that was that. And then I wrote It's a Jungle Out There, which is my tribute to the Lion King. So there are 10 lessons that I extracted from the movie. There are about 40 in total. I was going to write all 40, and I said, nobody's going to read 40 lessons, Dad. So try the first 10 and see what happens. But there's 10 lessons from the Lion King that I've taken, and I've put into the lessons to parents that I think parents should know or might find beneficial in raising their children.
Awesome.
He wrote a book at my behest because I was tweeting stuff on a regular basis, and he decided to take the tweets and turn the tweets into action steps that parents could take to spend time with their children. So he wrote the English version, and because he speaks 4 languages, he also put a version in Spanish. So
And what's the title of that one?
I'm sorry, what are we going to do today? And this one is, I would mess up the Spanish, que haramos hoy, which is, I believe it's the Spanish version of what are we going to do today. So they're just daily 52 weeks of things parents could do with their children for little or no money.
Wow, that's cool.
Right. And then over the pandemic, he and I wrote a children's book called The Amazing World of STEM, which is illustrated by our good friend and sister and daughter now. Her name is Kiva Richardson. And so this is what we wrote. It's a book he and I have been thinking about for some time, about how do we finally write a book that tells a story about a little kid that's kind of like him. And this is a young man, his name is Stuart Tyson Elmo Morgan, who loves science and wants to find a way to change the world by using science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to help his community and help the world.
And that's what STEM is: science, engineering, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
And mathematics, yep.
Because not everyone knows it. I've heard of that before, but I
Yes.
want to pause to make sure people catch that. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is STEM.
Naeem, my son, is an electrical and computer engineer, and he's finishing his PhD in electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon. And so when he was home, he said, hey, let's finally write this book. So that's that. We're now working on the second version of the book, not second edition, which is Amazing World of STEM, Homes for All. And now the kids in the story, the young people, not kids, the young people in the story are now tackling the issue of homelessness. And so they're finding a way to resolve that, to show adults that people don't need to be unhoused in this country. There's a very inexpensive and efficient way to do it, and the kids in the story are going to show how to do that.
Wow, that's awesome. We can definitely use that book.
Yeah. And then the last thing I wrote is this book called Journey Forward, and it is a collection of journal entries. So I think we talked earlier, I may mention to you, every day, the first 14 to 20 minutes of the day, I write my life how I'd like it to be as opposed to the way that it is. So as I asked you before, if the creator, whatever, the universe, the spirit, the source, whatever you believe in, ask me what I would do with my life if I had more time, my journal entries reflect that. So every day I'm writing about something that is yet to happen that I would like to see come to fruition. And a good friend of mine, her name is Dr. Robin, I'm going to get it right, Robin Henderson Wilson, she said to me, "You ought to take these and turn them into action statements and reflections for other people." I said, "That's a great idea, but I'm not doing it." If you want to do it, have at it. And she did. She put 55 of them together. She wrote action statements and reflections, and that's now Journey Forward. In addition to that, now we also have an audio version of some of them because the insistence of some of the people who've been reading these have said, "Hey, it'd be better if people could hear your voice doing them." So now I do them every morning to music. So there's
Oh,
that.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow, you have so much to offer, all these books and these programs. Share with the people how they can connect with you, maybe some other things that how you would like to help them, what they can connect with you with, where can they find you?
All right, well, the easiest way to find me, I mean, we have a website. We need to revamp that because it doesn't adequately tell you what it is that we're trying to do. But currently, it's nathanielaturner.com. So that's Nathaniel, A as in Adonis. That's not really my middle name. Turner, Turner, nathanielaturner.com. It's the one I wish my mother had given me instead of the one they gave me. But I'll say that for another time. But that's the easiest place that they can find me. We started a not-for-profit a couple years ago called the League of Extraordinary Parents, and it's a link right on that website. You can find it. But to provide parents with some insights on things that they could do with their children, we say from conception to cradle, or to grave, conception to grave, the things the parents could do. I should say cradle. We're leaving you alone really early. But conception to coffin, there are things that we can share with parents to do. That's that portion of it. Again, we're working on a few different things. We're working on the Who mindset, trying to develop that into a course that we can offer folks. But yeah, that's some of the stuff we're doing.
Awesome. So people, they can get the backward design, or do you do coaching with that, or is that a course that they do, or how does that work?
So I've done. Let me slow down because I can hear people who know me saying, "Nate, slow your brain down." So I apologize. We've done some courses. We designed a course last year called Mission 5126. And so Mission 5126 is a 9-week course. It's built around this idea of Harriet Tubman, who went on all of these missions, who just helped save not herself, but for other people. She found her way to freedom, and she kept going back and helping to free other people. So the idea behind Mission 5126 is that the best of us, once we figure out how to free ourselves, that we have to go back and bring others forward. And 5126 portion is a reminder of James Dyson and the Dyson vacuum cleaner, that he had 5,126 prototypes that failed before the 5,127th. And so we remind people that in order to succeed on these missions, it may take you 5,126 times to figure it out. But if he could do that, then so could we. If she could go back and help, and if he could keep trying, then that so could we. So we work through like the process of trying to determine where it is that you want to go, and helping people craft what is considered a North Star. Most people don't have a North Star. What is it every day, Danielle, that you look to that reminds you of where you want to go to be at your best, or to live your best life? And to borrow from Star Wars, not Star Trek, most of us have a Death Star that's present. That there are things that are hovering around that if we're not careful, as the Death Star does in Star Wars, it just appears out of nowhere and it zaps and destroys everything. There are things in our life the same way. So those are the kinds of things we start with in that course, but making people aware of, first of all, where it is you're trying to go, things that you need to avoid, and then we work that through a 9-week course to find a way to help people finally figure out how to start moving forward and developing that Wikipedia page to start reading the way we want to read it if we have no more time.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything that you want to leave the people with before we tie this up?
I just want to say I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you saw fit to have me here today. I've enjoyed myself immensely.
Oh, I'm just thank you for being with us today. And all of you listening, check out Nathaniel's page. Check out his courses. If you have children, you have grandchildren, you know people who have children, check it out and see what part of that can be a part of your life, because what he's done is really profound and I need to be looking into it myself. So thank you for tuning in with us today. And until next time, I'm Danielle Burnock from DanielleBurnock.com. Love yourself from Survive to Thrive, that lady on the internet who loves you. Mwah.